Imagine deleting the ocean. Just hitting backspace. On June 12, 1969, a group of engineers did exactly that to the most powerful waterfall in North America. They didn't just lower the volume, they hit the mute button. For the first time in 12,000 years, the American Falls stopped roaring. The mist vanished. The birds went silent. And what was left at the bottom wasn't just rocks. It was a crime scene, a graveyard, and a piggy bank? Welcome to the summer of '69. While the rest of the world was looking up at the sky, waiting for the moon landing, a few thousand people in New York were staring down into a dry, muddy hole, wondering where the water went. This is the story of the time we turned Niagara Falls off, and then panicked about turning it back on. First, we have to ask the obvious question. Why? Why would anyone try to kill a waterfall? Well, contrary to popular belief, Niagara Falls isn't just nature. It's a machine. A massive industrial engine that generates electricity and millions of tourist dollars. But by the 1960s, that machine was breaking. You see, waterfalls have a fundamental design flaw. They commit suicide. As the water crashes down over the precipice, it eats away at the base of the cliff. Eventually, giant slabs of rock break off and crash to the bottom. Geologists call this debris talus. I call it an ugly pile of rubble. By 1969, so much rubble had piled up at the base of the American Falls that it was threatening to turn the majestic waterfall into a glorified water slide. So, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, the people we call to fix rivers when they misbehave, came up with a brilliant, if slightly insane, plan. Have you tried turning it off and on again? This wasn't a faucet. You don't just close a valve on 60,000 gallons per second. They had to build a dam, a Cofferdam to be precise. Over 3 grueling days, a fleet of heavy dump trucks hauled 27,000 tons of rock and earth. That's roughly the weight of 2 Eiffel Towers dumped directly into the raging river. It was a war against physics. Truck after truck backed up to the slippery edge of death, dumping boulders to divert the flow toward the Horseshoe Falls. The current was fighting back, stripping away the earth as fast as they could dump it, but the engineers kept pushing. And then, it happened. The roar faded. The white noise that had defined this region since the Ice Age just stopped. Locals described the silence as deafening. People woke up in the middle of the night because the vibration in the ground was gone. It felt like the world had ended, or at least paused. When the mist finally cleared the next morning, people didn't see a riverbed. They saw a wasteland. Without the water, the falls looked like the surface of the moon, gray, jagged, and alien. A skeleton of the earth, stripped of its skin. And like any good skeleton, it had secrets. Tourists flocked to the edge, not to see water, but to see what was in the mud. They found exactly what you'd expect. Within hours of the water drying up, police discovered 2 bodies, a man and a woman. I won't get too graphic, but let's just say the falls are good at keeping secrets, but bad at preserving them. One of them had been there for a very long time. The tragedy of the falls is that for centuries, people have used it as a final exit. But usually, the water hides the reality. Stripping away the curtains stripped away the romanticism. It just left the cold, hard reality of gravity. Police had to scramble down the slippery, moss-covered rocks to recover them, all while the massive wall of the dam held back the river just a few hundred yards away. But it wasn't all grim. Because humans are weird, we have this instinct to throw money at water. For decades, tourists had been tossing coins into the falls for good luck. When the water vanished, those coins were just sitting there. We're talking millions of coins. It triggered a literal gold rush. Kids, tourists, and locals tried to scramble onto the slippery, dangerous rocks to grab a handful of wet pennies. It was chaos. People were slipping, sliding, and fighting over loose change. The police actually had to set up a perimeter and guard the dry riverbed to stop people from looting the wishing well. Imagine getting arrested for stealing a 1954 nickel from a dry waterfall. The 60s were wild. While the tourists looted, the engineers panicked. The whole point of drying out the falls was to clean up the rocks at the bottom. But when they drilled into the cliff face to test its stability, they found it was mush. The rock wasn't solid granite. It was shale and limestone. It was cracking. The waterfall was literally falling apart from the inside out. They spent months inserting steel bolts and cables into the cliff to hold it together. They drilled holes to relieve hydrostatic pressure. They basically stapled the waterfall back together. But here's the kicker, the punchline to the whole joke. After 5 months of study, drilling, and analyzing the ugly rocks at the bottom, the engineers made a decision. They decided to do nothing. Removing the rocks was too expensive, and the geologists argued that the rocks actually propped up the cliff face. If they moved them, the whole thing might collapse. So, the entire project, millions of dollars, turning off a natural wonder, the international media circus, resulted in a report that basically said, "Yeah, it looks fine. Turn it back on." November 1969. The show was over. Engineers packed the Cofferdam with dynamite. 2,600 people gathered on the shore to watch the finale. They pushed the plunger. The explosion rocked the gorge. At first, just a trickle broke through the dam. Then, a surge. Within minutes, the Atlantic Ocean's little brother came crashing back over the cliff. The silence was shattered by that familiar roar. The bodies, the coins, the bolts, the secrets, all buried under white water once again. Today, the American Falls is still flowing, but the engineers say it's only temporary. The rocks are still piling up. The cliff is still cracking. One day, whether in 100 years or 1,000, gravity will win. They might have to turn it off again. Or maybe, nature will just turn it off for us. So take a good look next time you visit, because nothing in this world is permanent.